a problem I want to share with you. It looks like my problem this week is electric fuel pumps. And I've got 3 different styles here on my bench. If you've been following my series on beauty, that beautiful 300 SEL 4.5, you knew that when I brought it here, it had fuel that had been sitting in the tank for over 10 years, and the fuel pump wasn't working at all. So we got to fix that fuel pump. 2 days later, I went to start Belvedere. That's my 1959 220 SE, and nothing. And right away, I turned the key on and went to listen back in the back to the fuel pump, and it wasn't running. So, oh no, fuel pumps. And then I've got Happier here in the shop, and I know if I don't do something, because it's been a couple years and I don't really drive Happier that much, that I'll probably have a fuel pump problem with Happier. So I'm going to try to do some preemptive work on Happier as it relates to fuel pump, because once again, these old Mercedes, most of them of the late 50s and up into the early 1970s, don't get driven that much. And if they sit, the fuel pumps will fail. And generally, it's not real bad. It's not a real bad failure. As you'll learn as I take you through this video and talk about my problems with fuel pumps. But so is the case with old cars. If you don't drive them, you let them sit too much. And we'll talk about some things later on in the video about how you can prevent them even if you do have the cars in storage. But I have 3 types of fuel pumps on the bench. I'm going to show you each type and talk about what you can do with them. You know, we have a kit for one, resealing kit, not a complete overhaul kit, and some of the seals work in the other one. This all happened because my 220 SE suddenly wouldn't start. So you can see I've got it jacked up. I couldn't even bring it into the shop because I've got Beauty up on the lift, and I'm working on the brakes, so I had to do it on the ground. You know, I'm getting kind of old to work on the ground. But I had to drain the fuel out, and you can see I got the rear plate off, and look at the corrosion. Look at the gunk and the goo, and of course that's what prevents the motor from turning most of the time. So let's take a closer look at the pump. We'll talk about some of the things you can do to prevent it, and also some of the things you can do with your pumps if you find they are not turning. I decided to pull out my selection of electric fuel pumps and related parts. I've got a number of these pumps that aren't working. You know, they're parts pumps. By the way, if any of you need parts for these pumps, like impellers or plates that are worn or your brush assemblies are shot, I don't have new brushes, but a lot of times these center plates will go bad in here. I've got a number of these parts. Just email sales@mercedessource.com or check my website. But we're dealing with basically 3 types of pumps. They have certain terms. This is called the long pump, and this is called the short pump. So I think you can see the differences, and we get people asking us all the time, will your kit work in my pump? And I tell people you have to send us a picture. Do you have a long pump or do you have a short pump? Because sometimes these pumps get swapped. And you can't just go by year and model. You actually have to visually look at it. So that's really important anytime you're working on a pump. If you see underneath my 220 SE, my Ponton, it has one of these early style long pumps. It's a little bit different than the short pump. The short pump is typical on cars like Happier, my 280 SL, and the Beast, which I formerly owned was my 6.3. They use the short pump. Now these short pumps are a little bit easier to work on. These are extremely expensive if you can find a new one. There are a couple companies that have tried to come up with some sort of an aftermarket pump that will work. But if you're into originality, you may want to fix this pump. But if it's been working, if it's only leaking a little bit out the bottom, or suddenly it stopped working like it did on my 220 SE, you can take these apart and put all new O-rings and seals in them, and that's the kit I have on my website. It's called our short pump reseal kit. And we get a lot of people that ask us, hey, I've got this long pump here. Do you have a kit for that? No, I'm sorry, we do not. But we do offer replacement seals for the bottom plate. Now you're currently looking at Belvedere's pump, and all I had to do was drain the fuel and pull that plate off. Here's the plate right here. And notice I've polished it up. It was heavily corroded. And the impeller was also gummed up. It had varnish and gum on it, so I had to clean that. And this is ready to go back on Belvedere. Belvedere's pump spins, by the way, but if the pump won't run, the very first thing you should do is drain the fuel out of your fuel tank and remove this bottom plate, and it may end up looking like this. Once you get a lot of varnish in there and this grabs a hold of the plate, the pump's not powerful enough to spin it. And that was the case with Beauty. If you recall, this pump also had the same problem. Even though it's a different design, this pump, when we took it apart, was all varnished and gummed up. But as soon as I cleaned it up and put it back together, it ran fine. And these pumps aren't available either anymore. And if you end up having to put an aftermarket pump on, you have to jerry-rig the brackets and the hoses and everything. So I opted to keep the original pump on the 4.5. Okay, so if you have a long pump, we can offer you 2 seals for the bottom plate. That's it. If you're lucky like I was with my 220 SE, you'll take that bottom plate off, you'll find a bunch of varnish and gum, you clean it all up, oil it up, put it back together with a new seal, and you're good to go. Or if the bottom plate is leaking, as was the case with this particular pump, you can see how old the seal is there. You know, it was just a matter of taking the bottom plate off, cleaning everything up, putting it back together. If you have to get into more extensive work on the long pumps here, I do not have anything that can help you. And the same with these. I do not have any replacement parts as of yet, although I'm currently trying to source the 2 O-rings for the cover plate here. So if you do have a gummed up pump, this is the early V8 pump from about 1971 up to about 1975. And after that, they changed the pump design. These are the problems that you'll end up dealing with if you have one of these old Mercedes with an electric fuel pump. But I'm going to get Belvedere going here quickly. We're going to put the plate back on. I will oil this up really well when I put this back together. I'll put Belvedere back down on the ground. It's going to just fire right up. It's a real sweetheart. Happier, I'm going to do some preventative work. I'm going to pull that plate off, see how it looks. And I would recommend, as a preventative measure, if you have one of these old cars you don't drive very much, put a little stable, that's gasoline stabilizer, in your fuel tank. Try to avoid fuel that has alcohol in it. And as I'm going to do with Happier and Belvedere, I'm going to put just a small amount of automatic transmission fluid in the fuel tank to make sure this stays lubricated, because that'll really help prevent scoring and wear and also help keep it from gumming up. I've got problems with these pumps. Hopefully you don't, but if you do, we do have a few resources that can help you. Well, there you have it. That's kind of what I'm dealing with. You know, my son Joel, he's the one that suggested I share my problems with you. You know, I have to admit, it's really hard, especially at my age, to admit to other people that you have problems. But at least these are problems I can fix.